Maybe there's not a good answer to the question of God's silence in response to our longing and desperation.
In the silence of God, there has got to be something of that kind of clearing of space.
And maybe it's a thing that we finally understand by years of experience rather than through some thorough analysis. But still, what do we do when God's presence seems like an empty room?
Into the silence of God, you can say what you need to say.
The Silence of God, Part 2. Today on Don't Hold Me to This.
Last week we talked about this silence of God, and we were talking about how we would define it and what that label signifies in
Yeah.
our own understanding of it. And you were talking about the story of of an appeal to God in a way that you believe that um, God, who is our Father, and we're told is a good Father, who wants to give His children um, bread when they ask for bread and fish when they ask for fish. Um, so you were telling that story of appealing to God out of that deep sense of leaning into that, and in some ways in a childlike way, right? That's part of maybe the hurt that comes with it, is that you feel like you kind of enter into that space of childlikeness to appeal to God that way, and then get nothing back. You get the silence, and you very honestly but very hesitantly said that in that experience, um one of the thoughts that has arisen for you is that you hope that you're a better father to your children than God is to you, or has been to you
Yeah.
in those moments. So that's what that feels like, and that's what it conjures in you. And so, and one of the things I really rehearsed that. There's the other story you told about being the extra in the Pelican Brief was also really powerful, and it was processing both of those things. And one, I felt like, as I was processing that, thinking about it afterward, I felt like I walked on that moment a bit.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe as I was thinking about it, it was maybe because we're on a podcast and just too much sitting with just the weight of what you said. Maybe that's not for a podcast. I don't know.
Who knows?
Um, but so I want to circle back to that, and maybe just um uh one, say that I was having, as you said that, I had a conversation maybe right after the podcast, maybe it was before, but with somebody who is going through um, uh, a spouse with a terminal illness.
Mhm.
And their statement to me was that I feel abandoned by God. So I think that's the same word. And so I think this feeling, is this reality, is not, this is us. This is real, and it's impactful. Um and then I wanted to ask you to um maybe just ask you why it was so difficult, and you made a point to qualify
Mm.
before you could say it out loud, qualify it by saying, "Don't hold me to this."
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
this has made me at times with hope that I'm a better father than God has been to me. What was going on there that made that so difficult to say out loud?
Yeah. I think there's at least two things shooting from the hip. Um, I think the reason why I wanted to reiterate the the request to not be held to it is that we live in a time where we are not allowed to experiment out loud. Um, like the things we say aloud have to come with the full force of uh, of a conclusion. It has to be fully formed and fully developed and in some way universally true, right? And and um, and I didn't want to be held to that standard. I think because I just don't think we can bear that weight. So that's one reason why I was hesitant is that I know I was saying that rather what felt like a volatile phrase out into a space where people are often held unfairly, I think, to to a standard that they're not trying to meet. Um, so I think that's the first thing. But I think the second thing is I hesitated because I just don't want it to be true, right? Somebody had written a book that I think it was called um, what was it called? Maybe it was like it was the first book was called The God Who Was There, and the second book was called God Is There and Is Not Silent or something like that.
Yeah, that's Schaefer.
Yeah, Francis Schaeffer. And I remember thinking to myself, if the presence of God in a moment of what felt to me like very childlike desperation is no if the presence of God in a moment of childlike desperation doesn't address the 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 problem as it presents itself, then how is the presence of God any different than the absence of God? And how is it any better? Um, and I really,
And what you mean by that is we often leverage the answer somewhere into the future. Is that right?
I probably mean something
Or
like
the solution, right? The answer to my immediate thing seems to always get, or maybe that's what I'm just piecing together from what you're saying.
hmm,
That that it doesn't address this very tangible moment. It just pushes it out into some future where this moment will no longer matter, as if that's even possible, right?
I think that's a part of it. Yeah, if I can break it into two parts, I certainly think that's a part of it. In the way that generally people within our tradition, or maybe just within our faith generally, tend to answer questions like normally the way it's posed is why does God let bad things happen to good people? And I'm not putting myself forward as a good person that deserves to have the minivan fixed.
Right.
Asked, I'm putting myself forward as a desperate child.
Right. So the question could just be, why do bad things happen to beloved children?
Yeah,
Why does God let bad things happen to beloved children? Right.
yeah, I think that's a better way of stating it, and putting it in terms of the presence of God, as Francis Schaeffer's book title, I think it was a book title was, God who is here and he is not silent. Like in that moment when I prayed that childlike, desperate prayer, and then went to push the button that starts the minivan and nothing happened. Um, my my response to that book title is um, he seems awfully silent
Right.
right now. And if his presence doesn't address this problem right now, then how is his presence any different than absence?
Right.
And why is that kind of presence better? And I don't doubt that there's all sorts of really wonderful answers to that. I mean, I think um, the part two of the Silence of God series at least proposes some sort of answer, like his presence suggests he's listening. And I want to take that for all it's worth. I mean, I think there's a ton of research in the kind of trauma therapy space that says the most effective healing modality for people who have experienced trauma starts with empathy from their therapist, starts with somebody sitting across the table from the traumatized person and and echoing as much as they can on their own face the pain that the traumatized person experienced. So, so when a traumatized person says, "Here's what I went through, and here's all the ways in which it was hard," what a therapist who's interested in their healing ought to start by doing is looking them in the eye and saying, "That is really hard.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. That is really hard." And that's real. And that's where healing starts for traumatized people. So I have no doubt that the presence, even a silent presence in the form of listening, that was my theory in the piece
Right.
2 of the series, is meaningful. But also like I gotta get my family home. And we're stuck in this van miles from home.
Right.
And I need help with that also.
Yeah.
So I think that's the reason I hesitated is, man, I'm about to say something out loud that people will definitely use against me. Because that's the kind of space that we've created. And I hope that our conversations go a long way to undoing that space. But so far we still live in that space. And the second thing is like, I'm about to say something out loud that I just wish wasn't true. And am sort of afraid to say it. I think maybe the reason why, by Eugene Peterson's accounting, fully half of the book of Psalms are lament psalms, is that we need to know that we have permission to say things out loud that we feel like we ought not say, right?
Yeah, and I think so. I think that, man, and I don't know how to quantify how important that is. But even that statement that you just made, I feel like gets whitewashed in a lot of Christian culture. Right? The Psalms, we're people of the book. We're Bible people, and yet at times I don't. It, at time, I mean, in my life, I have been trained implicitly or explicitly, probably both, to undervalue or to dismiss or to very quickly, yeah, but any notion of of uh I'll say it this of taking God to task, right? Like of and I don't mean that I don't mean that I just mean that in honesty, like, God, what are you doing? What is going on here? Have you left us? Have you abandoned us? What there's and it feels like that the power of those lament, the just even the percentage of lament within the Psalter, which many people have called the prayer book of the church, and the very prayers. Was it Luther who called them, the prayers of Jesus, right? So this and and so it seems like even the Bible opens up permission for you to say what you said. I said something very similar, after my accident, which out loud, which was just as honest and true as I could be, which is, growing up Protestant, this was such a foreign, you know, weird thing to me, but after the accident, I I came to understand, uh, the desire to pray for the dead. I was just,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it, uh, I wasn't making an argument about whether we should, or the Bible says we should or shouldn't, or anything.
Right.
But to say it out loud and to say it into a group of other, theologically trained people, I knew I could say it out loud and not get the precise corrective response,
Yeah.
rather than just an ability to allow that s- to actually, this is the point of your essay, like this is where silence actually has value.
Yeah.
Because what I needed from into that space was people to sit with the impact of that
Mm-hmm.
and just feel it with
Yeah.
me, and to, if they responded back, to respond back with words of, man, I can I can feel that.
Yeah. Right.
Um
Right.
and so if the po- if your thesis is correct, and I think it's certainly got to be, to it may not be the sum total,
Mm-hmm.
but of what's going on, but it is certainly, we we know. I mean, we know God hears us this way, right? I mean, that's Exodus. What is that? Exodus 3 or 2? The people cry out in their agony, and the text says, and God heard,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now he eventually acts,
Mm-hmm.
but to be sure, but um there's something in that hearing, or we've talked about this before, that one of our favorite passages is Jesus in the house of Simon,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole turning point is, at least in my reading of it, is, Simon, do you see this woman?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is no,
No.
he
Oh,
doesn't. But Jesus does, right? Right. So to be heard and to be seen, I think, are, to me, are two sides of the same coin, to
yeah.
be empathized with and cared for in that way. And
Yeah.
Jesus says, do you see her?
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, it's fascinating to me, though, that the Psalter is full of Psalms are full of questions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the substructure of of the way we handle this sort of thing in our current moment is sort of wrapped up in the way we construe both faith and doubt, right? Uh,
Hmm.
that to say a sort of thing, um, like I said or like you said, is seen as an expression of doubt, and doubt is understood as antithetical to faith.
Hmm.
They're on the spectrum, and to move toward faith is to move away from doubt, and move toward doubt is to move away from faith. And I just don't think that's true.
Yeah.
Um, And I think in order to be able to lament in the way that the story of the Bible invites us to lament, and maybe to put a finer point on it, to lament in the way that we as human beings in the world as it is need to lament, we have to abandon the sense that faith and doubt are antithetical, but we have to reimagine how they live together um, as siblings, as in some way interdependent. And I don't know exactly how to think about that because they certainly feel contrary to each other, but I just don't think they are.
Yeah, and I think we also equate faith and precision and rightness,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
Um, so so any articulation of something, even if it's honest about what we're thinking or feeling, if it's out of the realm of what we've construed as theologically correct, then that's also a turn toward away from faith toward doubt,
mm-hmm. Right,
right?
right.
Um, and so, uh, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it makes me wanna see if what to conceive of what the if it's not on a linear kind of um, uh, connection, then makes me want to try to draw up something of the way these things do orbit around each other
Mm-hmm,
and inform each other,
mm-hmm.
um, because I do think that's a really good point about maybe why we struggle to allow these things to be voiced,
Mm-hmm.
and then to allow them to sit, right? To hang there. And I always, you know, you know, seen those examples where somebody, you're in a small group and everything about the small group is, hey, we just want to be authentic and real. And somebody starts doing that, and then everybody's like, oh shit, we gotta we gotta stop this.
Yeah, yeah,
We're- this is not good, right? They're saying things they're not supposed to say, and
that's right.
and it's and it's just it's and I mean I've been in those situations, and it's disheartening, and um we wind up betraying something of what our true commitment
Mm-hmm,
is, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I've been, this is not to say I've got this figured out and other people have done it wrong.
Sure.
I've certainly uh, um, had my share of pursuing rightness
Mm-hmm.
and um, yeah, certainty and those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think in many ways the person in the small group example who is um, to experiment theologically out loud, maybe is exercising more faith than anybody else in the group,
Right.
right? They're not exercising certainty or precision, but they don't have to exercise those things to express faith. Um, I think it was Karl Barth who said this. I could be wrong, so Bart, forgive me if I'm putting words in your mouth. But he said, I don't know. He was talking about the sort of the concept of universalism. He was giving a lecture to a bunch of Swiss pastors, um, and um, he said something like, I don't know if universalism is true, but we should all hope that it is.
Right.
So all of a sudden there's this interesting insertion into um, the kind of logic of theological uh, um, into the logic of theological precision, an insertion of something as kind of uh, irrational, non-logical as hope. Right?
Right.
So there's like there's more than one thing going on, right? It's like this. Here's an analogy that came to mind. It's like if I'm doing math with my teaching my 8-year-old daughter how to do long division, and she says, "Well, but I want all the zeros to be green." You know what I mean? It's like it's 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 coming from another faculty of hers,
Mm-hmm.
kind of creative aesthetic faculty. And I think that's what hope is doing as we're considering these kinds of theological construals. It suggests that there's another layer of thinking, of exercise of our faculty that need to go into this, right? And then what that does is it says, like, we have to we have to in some way put on pause the desire for precision in order for us all to have the space to say what we need to say.
Yeah, it's interesting because I immediately my mind went to this. I think that kind of daring side of hope.
Mm.
We have a biblical example, at least one biblical example of it, because it seems like that's what Abraham's doing when he's interceding for Gomorrah,
Mm-hmm.
right? Am I mixing?
No, you're right.
You're right, where he keeps going back to God and saying, if there's, but what? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so you'll save it for 100 righteous. What about 50?
Yeah.
Can we dare to
Yeah.
hope that?
Yeah.
Um, and I love the point Keller makes this point, and he gets it from some biblical scholar, that what Abraham is doing there is he's he's testing the reverse of what everybody knew culturally back then, which is, of course, the whole village can be ruined by one unrighteous, or a whole family can be brought to shame by one unrighteous family member. And he's testing the reverse of that, and that the intrigue of the story, or the possibility of the story, is that Abraham could have gotten all the way to one.
Yeah.
Right. And he doesn't go that far.
Mm-hmm.
But then the story does eventually get to that
Mm-hmm.
that kind of crazy possibility in it. So it seems like that. I like that. I like that image of, and I think it's really important to the way you frame that, because we often miss the creative insertion of the zero be green, right? Because we as parents, we as pastors, we as people who are trying to keep our own lives squared away, as we want to control the field of discourse.
Right.
We don't really like it when somebody changes the rules, or comes in at a slant. And so we miss the creative possibility of that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then and so I think that in and of itself is a beautiful reminder and invitation to think about these kinds of interactions differently. And this goes back to our first, conversation about improvisation, right? Um, when we're trying to control the field of discourse and not allow anything to intrude and force us to think differently or speak differently or frame things differently, then we're not actually entering into the story. We're just managing it.
Right.
So I think that's an important reminder just on that basic level, but I also think it's I think to then bring in something of hope as daring or hope as creativity. That part of that's an element of hope, is that we might dream of possibilities with God that maybe we can't ever know. But is it heresy to I'm sure there are people that I know that would think what Bart said is, all they could hear is heresy, right? They couldn't enter into the possibility of thinking about it as is even worth considering, right? And I think that shrinks our I think that's a shrinking of faith, not an expression of it.
I think that's right. So what we can say is, well, maybe come at it this way. What we're not equipped to say is, this is what the silence of God means. Okay. I don't know. Like, I don't know that I can't see the math on that. But what we can say is, into the silence of God, you can say what you need to say. So that's the first thing. What do you do? Not what does the silence of God mean, because I just don't know that we have access to that. What do you do with it? And I think first, what I want to do with it is say into it everything I need to say.
And can I say that, need to say, and I want to say, not to you, but just out loud, that there's safety in saying what you need to say, and even things maybe you look back on and say, I didn't need to say that. Right? The risk isn't that the risk isn't the risk is that you wouldn't say the things that
the risk
are really welling in you. The risk isn't saying things out loud or how to in your head to God that that you think are wrong or bad or whatever, or whatever it is. The risk is actually not taking not that as an opportunity to to express what's going on.
Yeah. To put it succinctly, the risk is not in saying too much. The risk is in not saying enough.
Right.
Yeah. But what else? So that's the first thing. Say into the silence of God everything you need to say, and then some, and even some things that you might later discover you don't need to say, and wouldn't ever want to say again. But then what? What else? I mean, imagine you're sitting across the table from somebody that you're coaching, and they've asked this question, and you've given them the space and the freedom and the confidence to say everything they need to say and then some. And they've done that with confidence and with abandon and with real faith. And then they say to you, okay, I did that and I'm going to keep doing it. I want to make it a practice. This is not just a one-time thing. Now what?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want me to answer the analogy, I think my first impulse would be to, if they were asking me now what after they had said everything they needed to say, I think I would want to say, well, yeah, what now? What do you? I think I would want to invite them to maybe fill in the the blanks to answer that question. Or at least to guide me in how I might join them in answering that question.
Yeah.
And this is where I do think one of the things that I think we haven't, I don't think we've said this explicitly, but it seems like part of what we're saying in this then is that what we can with this moment of the silence of God, we can say into it whatever we need to say, whatever's there and whatever's honest. And if God is our Father, and I believe that, I'm not putting that as a hypothetical. I take that by faith that He is a Father to us and He is a good Father to us. Um, uh, uh, then our ability to speak with honesty to a good and loving Father to me is a no-brainer. Even if we cross line, I think it just comes to mind, but I think of, I hope there's no spoilers in this, but there's a point in Harry Potter where Harry Potter feels abandoned by Dumbledore, and he is railing against him and smashing his stuff, and Dumbledore allows him to do so without retribution, right? Because in that moment he's a quote unquote good, he's modeling what a loving mentor, father, mother human does. So and the other thing I want to say is what we're also saying, that I want to say this, and I feel like this is what we're saying, is that in the silence of God, there is there is a pregnancy, and that pregnancy is an invitation.
Yeah.
Right. So the invitation is to, if at minimum, if nothing else, to come as a child to a loving Father and be able to pour out what is going on inside of us, in our grief, our sorrow, our uncertainty, our confusion, our anger, our frustration, our frustration with God himself, all of that stuff is there's in that. And I think that goes to, your what you wrote, your essay, which is, you talk about your therapist who closes his eyes. Is it a he? Closes his eyes and shut is the way I hear it is he's shutting out everything in order to enter in to feel what you're describing.
Yeah. I got the sense that he was in some way, as much as he could, experiencing my feelings of aloneness and smallness and and everything else. Yeah.
And so in that and I think the reason you tell that story and the reason it stands out to you, if I can be so bold as to tell you what I think the reason is,
Sure.
is there's that kind of empathy is an invitation to you to what it's just an invitation to you and to your personhood, to your story. It is a clearing of space and say and clearing a space in himself to say you belong here, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's true, then in the silence of God, there has got to be something of that kind of clearing of space for you, an invitation for you to be present here with all of it. And so that is yeah. So I wonder what you think about that. I feel like we just haven't used that word, but I feel like that's what we're saying.
I think that's right. I think that I think I have to recognize, maybe we all need to recognize that that so much of my sense of things, of myself, of the concept of problems, of what intervention therefore can look like from God, is so much of that hangs on the kinds of stories that our contemporary moment suggests we're allowed to tell, right? I remember a story that one of my far mentors was telling me. He worked with Nelson Mandela's speechwriter. And I think I've told you this story before, Shaner. Nelson Mandela was put into prison, and this young man now had to go out and speak to the nation and explain what's going on. And so he went to his elders, and as this man is telling my mentor this story, my mentor interrupted him and said, "Oh, so you can get advice, so they can tell you what to do?" And the young man sort of looked at my mentor like, "What? I don't understand. Why would I do that?" Like, no, I went to my elders so that they could listen and ask questions. Not so that they could tell him what to do. And for him, in that culture, which is so different than ours, that's exactly what he sensed that he needed. His perception of the appropriate intervention from elders was not just tell me what to do, just fix this problem. It is listen and ask me the sorts of questions I need so that I can navigate myself out there into that public space to say what people need to hear. Well, that's a totally different way of 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 imagining the problem, and
Right.
therefore imagining what an intervention would look like.
Yeah, and imagining your role as an elder, right?
Yeah, reimagining all of it, and
Yeah.
I think so. I want to take that as a kind of um, as a kind of pause as I'm thinking about um, the silence of God into what I've seen as the problem. Um, I might experience that as a negative issue because I've in one way misunderstood the problem and therefore expected some kind of intervention which is not going to be helpful anyway. So I want to account for that. I want to be open to that possibility that there may be a more important thing that needs to happen. Because at the end of the day, like we got home, we all got home.
Right.
My wife and kids and I, we all slept in our beds that night. And then the van got fixed, and then a year later broke down on the way to visit you all in Oregon, halfway there.
I remember.
So I think that maybe it's helpful to think of the silence of God as what that young man expected from his elders. Space to creatively imagine a way through this, a way forward. Space to show up, to be honest about your senses of fear and anxiety and shame and embarrassment and inadequacy and everything else. My list is very long. My list of my sensations in that regard are very, very long.
Yes.
And then to and then to give room to improvisation, give room to imagine some way forward other than pulling a lever of power, throwing an elbow, right? Like some other way of being in the world that allows me to move forward in a way that I maybe couldn't see without that silence.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And you mentioned improvisation again. I think it goes back to our earlier conversation about if we're going to understand um the story of God and the story he's writing in Christ, then we've got to put at a very base level his his commitment to humanity, and then his commitment to our humanity. And so what I hear you describing in a in that make leads me to that kind of to thinking to the conclusion that to value your humanity, there really is no other way but then to allow you to um, present yourself as you are. With and to give space for that, right? To not thump you, even if you're even if you're saying things that you shouldn't say, or
breaking all of Dumbledore's stuff.
not. Yeah, that's right. Doing things right, saying things here that you're going to look back on and go, I don't think that anymore.
Yeah.
I've gone through this process. I poured this out, and now because I've gone through this process, I look back and realize that my perspective was skewed. But in order to get to that place down here, that space has to be created for you to go through that process, because you're a human being,
right?
Who that's how we learn and grow and learn to repent and you know, pursue the process of healing and all those things. So there's something, it seems like we can kind of put into this mix of what we're saying, is that the silence of God has something to do with his absolute commitment to the humanity of the story he's telling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And therefore your humanity, my humanity, you know, every human's humanity and personality and personal story, and which I don't know what that, I don't know how other people hear that. But I've said this before, and I think this is why even last week we talked about that, you know, the image I have of being drawn into the dark forest.
Mm-hmm.
And what I felt like I I understood there, or was able to come with me, was, you know, is the resurrection. But to expand on that, the reason the resurrection is it, the reason the resurrection was was that for me, in that, in those moments, in those dark nights of the soul, was this very thing. The resurrection says that the very humanity of the moment that I have felt, you know, abandoned by God or rejected by God. You know, your other metaphor being on the cutting room floor of the story God's telling.
Mm-hmm.
That even that very existential hurt and grief and fear and all of the stuff that are, again, guilt and shame, and it's all those things that are caught up in our interior struggles, and the good, you know, even the things that we the things that we're made for, the desire for significance and purpose, and to put our hand to the plow, and to be able to have a crop when it's time for harvest. That the resurrection, the incarnation, the life, death, and resurrection, the incarnation of Jesus, if it's anything, it's a demonstration that God takes the humanity of all that absolutely seriously.
Mm-hmm.
It may not answer the moment, but it certainly is a demonstration that our those deep longings and the angsts of our humanity, God has said, I'm with you. I'm here, and I'm committed to those very things.
Yeah.
And I find that comforting.
Mm-hmm.
Even if not sometimes frustrating,
mm-hmm.
that things don't get fixed, right?
Yeah.
The fix is, you know, we all have things we would love to have been fixed yesterday. So
yeah, maybe at the end of the day, it's at least as important, if not more important, that all the zeros get colored in green than that we find the answer to the long division problem.
I like it. I like it. I don't know what that means.
I don't either.
but I like it.
Feels like a good problem.
Yeah.
Don't Hold Me to This podcast is a production of Don't Hold Me to This. You can find out more, do some more reading, and get in touch at don'tholdmetothis.com. No apostrophe.